You are listening to a Galatea audio production of Sold to the Alpha, written by Kelsie Tate. The sound of her name jolted Autumn awake, her eyes snapping open to focus on the clock. "Crap," she muttered, scrambling out of bed in a frenzy. She darted around her room, gathering clean clothes and everything she needed for the day ahead. "Crap," she mumbled to herself, pulling a t-shirt over her head before rushing out of the room and down the stairs. Luna. Joella raised an eyebrow as Autumn skidded into the kitchen. "Nice of you to join us," she drawled. "I'm sorry, Luna. My alarm must have—" "I don't want excuses, Autumn. Finish the pack's breakfast and then get on with your chores. We have a busy day today," Joella interrupted, her voice dismissive as she turned and left the kitchen. Autumn managed to cook breakfast just in time for the meal to begin. As pack members filed in, she handed them their plates and then set about cleaning up the kitchen. "What are you still doing in here?" Joella barked, striding back into the room. "I was just finishing up the dishes. Is there something you need?" Autumn asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Joella huffed, handing her a list. "Here are some additional tasks I need done today, on top of your usual chores, of course." Autumn scanned the list, her eyes widening in disbelief. "There must be 30 things on here. There's no way I'll get this all done today." "Well then, you better get started, dear, because I expect it to be done," Joella said with a smirk. "Rein in that attitude. It'll get you in trouble." Lowering her head in submission, Autumn bit back a retort. She knew that if she looked Joella in the eyes, the defiance and irritation in her face would be all too clear. Sitting at the kitchen island, Autumn took a moment to strategize how she would tackle the seemingly endless list of chores. After a few minutes, she sighed and got to work, knowing she didn't have much of a choice. It had been 4 years since Autumn's parents had died, leaving her with their massive debts to the Alpha and the Pack. She had been 20 at the time, in the middle of her second year of college. The Alpha had pulled her out of school, telling her she had to work off her parents' debts. And so, here she was, still cleaning toilets and cooking every meal in the pack house. Autumn managed to complete most of Joella's list before she had to stop and prepare dinner. She walked into the kitchen looking disheveled, her hair falling out of its ponytail and her shirt stained with various substances. Leaning against the counter, she took a deep breath and allowed herself a moment to dream of the day she would leave this place and never have to do another person's chores again. She had just started on dinner when alarm bells began to ring. Confused, she watched as pack members rushed around in a panic. Following the chaos, she finally managed to grab hold of someone. "What's going on?" she asked. "Alpha Warner defied the treaty. He just attacked the Red Moon Pack, and now they're on their way to our borders," the girl said, her voice trembling with fear before she ran off. Autumn stood frozen, her mind racing. Breaking a treaty was bad enough, but breaking the treaty with Red Moon? That treaty had been made by the Alpha King himself. Defying the king would mean severe punishment for the entire pack. "What were you thinking, Warner?" she heard Joella's voice from down the hall. Autumn quickly ducked behind a wall, not wanting to be seen. She had heard rumors about King Elijah, and if they were all going to die, she wanted to know why.
"Joella, not now. There are too many things in motion," Alpha Warner replied in a hushed tone.
"Warner, you know what he'll do. Why would you break the treaty so openly? I thought we had a plan." Joella's voice was laced with concern. "Red Moon just—" Warner trailed off. "Just what?" Joella snapped. "Is this some power play? Did you do this to try and take over their pack quickly? Because I thought we had a strategy."
"Their land is our land, Joella. They stole it from us and then convinced King Elijah to let them keep it," Alpha Warner growled.
"If you attacked them, then it means you thought you could win. So whatever you're doing, do it fast. As soon as Elijah hears about this, it's all of our heads," Joella whispered urgently. Anger bubbled up inside Autumn as she realized their Alpha had risked everything for a few dozen acres of land. She huffed, preparing to return to the kitchen when a hand grabbed her arm. She spun around to find Joella glaring at her. "Luna," Autumn murmured, lowering her head. "Were you spying on us, Autumn?" Joella hissed. "No, Luna, I was just finishing up the list you gave me," Autumn replied quietly. "Not likely," Joella scoffed, dragging Autumn up the stairs and down the hall to her small room. She shoved her inside and slammed the door shut. "What you heard will never leave your lips. Now you will stay in here until this is all figured out," she warned, locking the door behind her. Frowning, Autumn decided to make the most of her unexpected free time. She took a long, hot shower to wash away the grime from her day of chores, then pulled on a large t-shirt and crawled into bed. She tried to sleep, but the sounds of fighting in the distance kept her awake. The pack's mind link was in chaos, filled with yells, commands, and cries for help. The pack was at war, and it was only a matter of time before the warriors returned, injured and exhausted from their battle at the border. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Autumn couldn't help but wonder what would happen when the king found out. Autumn awoke the next morning to find her bedroom door still locked. She jiggled the handle, but it wouldn't budge. With a small chuckle, she figured they must have forgotten and would soon remember when their stomachs started growling for breakfast. She decided to take her time in the shower, letting the hot water cascade over her as she pondered what her life might have been like if her parents hadn't gotten themselves into so much trouble. She would have finished school, pursued her dream of becoming a nurse, and maybe even found a mate. In the beginning, she had wished every day for her mate to find her and whisk her away from this place. But now, at almost 24, it seemed more and more likely that if she hadn't found a mate yet, she probably never would. Sighing at the thought, she turned off the shower and got dressed. Standing in front of her small mirror, she pulled her long, dirty blonde hair into a knot on top of her head. "Someday we'll leave this place," her wolf whispered softly. "Someday," Autumn agreed, smiling at her reflection before walking to the door, momentarily forgetting it was still locked. She pulled on the handle and, with a chuckle, settled onto the bed with a book. An hour later, she heard yelling from down the hall. "Autumn, you think you can get away with sleeping in again and not making breakfast?" Joella's voice carried through the house. Footsteps approached, and Autumn heard the door handle twist. Joella muttered a curse under her breath before unlocking the door. "Why aren't you downstairs?" she demanded, glaring at Autumn. "You locked me in here, Joella. I can't exactly make breakfast if I can't leave the room," Autumn replied, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Joella stepped forward, her face inches from Autumn's. "I'm warning you, Autumn. Find a new tone of voice or you'll spend more than an evening in this room. And if I'm locked in here, who will feed you or do all of your work?" Autumn shot back, her eyes narrowing. Joella's eyes darkened, flecks of black appearing in her deep blue irises as her anger flared. "What did you say?" Autumn's eyes widened as she realized what she had just said, but there was no taking it back now. "I said that you won't lock me in here, or you'd have to do all of your own work and cook the pack meals yourself like you're supposed to," she stammered, her confidence wavering. Joella's hand connected with Autumn's cheek, the slap sending a stinging pain through her face. Autumn's hand flew to her cheek in shock. "You don't have a choice. Your parents owed us hundreds of thousands of dollars, and just because you think you're better than your parents' debt does not mean you get to speak like that. Now get downstairs and do your chores before I have a mind to keep you in here forever." Lowering her head, Autumn walked past Joella, surprised at herself for speaking to the Luna like that. Joella could have her severely punished for talking back. "How dare she hit us?" her wolf howled in her head. "I was defiant," Autumn mumbled. "Someday we will be free of her and this place. When our debt is paid, we will leave and find a new home, a better home," her wolf spoke with a mix of anger and hope. Autumn smiled in response, looking forward to that day. She worked diligently for the rest of the day, and around 4 in the afternoon, the doorbell rang. It was unusual, as pack members typically just walked in without ceremony. Opening the door, Autumn found a well-dressed, strikingly handsome wolf standing on the front porch. "Can I help you?" she asked politely. "I am Thomas, beta to the king. I was sent by King Elijah. I must see your alpha at once," he replied, his voice even and devoid of emotion. Autumn's eyes widened in surprise. "Yes, please, come in, Beta. I'll take you to his office." "Thank you," he said gently, following her through the house and to the pack offices. After showing him in, Autumn returned to the kitchen to start dinner. It was nerve-wracking knowing he was here, especially considering the reason for his visit. King Elijah must have heard they had broken the treaty. As she finished dinner, she could hear yelling coming from the pack offices. Whatever was being said was not well received on either end. Halfway through dinner, the Alpha, Luna, and Beta Thomas entered the dining hall. "We will have a pack meeting immediately following dinner. Spread the word to your families and friends. Attendance is mandatory," the Alpha announced before walking back to his office. The pack sat in silence, wondering what the meeting could be about. Autumn knew it had something to do with Beta Thomas's arrival. King Elijah wasn't the type to let things go, and Alpha Warner had clearly disobeyed his king. It gave her hope, though. Sending Thomas instead of an army was a good sign. "Or it's how he sends his declarations of war," her wolf muttered grimly. "Not helping," Autumn whispered in response. As dinner came to an end, Autumn cleaned the kitchen and prepared to attend the meeting. As pack members filed into the meeting hall, she dried her hands and joined them. Taking a seat in the back, she shifted nervously in her chair as the pack waited for the meeting to begin. They whispered among themselves, speculating about the reason for the sudden gathering and the identity of their visitor. The doors opened with a bang, and the Alpha and Luna entered the room, followed by Beta Thomas. The hall fell silent as the pack members lowered their heads in submission and a touch of fear for what was about to happen. Alpha Warner stood at the front of the room. "Hi, Mountain Pack. I called this meeting because of what has been happening here the last few days." He stepped back and gestured toward Thomas. "Thomas, beta to the Alpha King, has a few things to say to us." Thomas stepped forward, his expression as unreadable as when Autumn first encountered him. "Hi, Mountain Pack. 2 days ago, you initiated an attack on the borders of the Red Moon Pack in an attempt to reclaim land you believe is rightfully yours. That attack has violated the treaty you formed with the pack, overseen by your king, Alpha Elijah, and has ignited a war. The king is furious with the actions of your Alpha and your pack. However, he has chosen to show mercy. You have 2 options. Accept the punishment and fine, or wage war against Red Moon and the king's armies. We present this to you so you may understand the consequences of your reckless actions. You have 10 minutes to decide if you wish to proceed with the war you've begun." Thomas took a seat beside a visibly pale Alpha Warner at the front of the room as the pack erupted into murmurs and opinions. Each wolf consulted with their families and friends, weighing the worth of war. After 10 minutes, Alpha Warner stood and the room fell silent once more. "Hi, Mountain Pack. I have heard your thoughts on this matter." The Alpha's scowl deepened, clearly reluctant to speak the words he was about to say. "We will accept the consequences of our actions. Inform King Elijah that we will accept his punishment." Thomas nodded. "I will relay the message to His Majesty and then return to collect your payment." Alpha Warner nodded with a frown before retaking his seat. The pack whispered nervously amongst themselves, speculating about the nature of the punishment. Autumn sat on edge in her seat, aware that the price would be steep. But anything was better than the death and suffering of war. When the 2 packs had been at war before, it was years of violence and anxiety. The treaty had been established to prevent such a recurrence. That is, until Alpha Warner allowed his ego to jeopardize the pack's safety. Autumn couldn't help but chuckle when she heard her wolf label him an idiot. Thomas re-entered a few minutes later.
I have informed King Elijah of your decision. He has withdrawn the forces he had already prepared to send your way. As for the punishment, Alpha Elijah requires half of your warriors to serve in the king's pack for 1 year.
The room exploded into gasps and growls as the people realized the consequences their Alpha had brought upon them. Their families would be separated for a year, and the pack would be undermanned. "That's preposterous. We can't possibly protect our pack with half of our warriors gone," Warner yelled, his face reddening. Warner. Beta Thomas spun around to face him, his tone icy and daring the Alpha to overstep. "You brought this upon yourself." He turned back to the room. "Now for the fine." Alpha Warner nodded, and with a dismissive wave of his hand, he looked out into the crowd of the pack. Suddenly, Autumn felt herself being seized by the arms and yanked from her chair. She struggled against the grip of the 2 large pack enforcers holding her tightly. "What are you doing? Let go of me!" Autumn screamed, thrashing and kicking to force them to release her. They dragged her to the front of the meeting hall and before the Alpha and Luna. "This girl owes us a debt of hundreds of thousands of dollars. We do not have the funds to pay the fine King Elijah has imposed, so we offer the girl in exchange to serve in his household until he deems the debt repaid."
Thomas scowled. "You should have considered that before violating the treaty. The fine was $1 million. Are you saying this girl is worth that much?"
Luna Joella stepped forward, her eyes brimming with feigned tears. "This girl means so much to us and to our pack. It is a loss we will scarcely be able to bear, but we know our pack's safety is more important than our feelings." "What?" Autumn spat. "You liars! The only thing you won't be able to bear is having to wash your own damn clothes. You can't just sell me off to fix some mistake you made?" Thomas narrowed his eyes at her before nodding.
"The exchange will have to suffice. Hopefully, King Elijah will be understanding. Escort her out of here. We leave immediately."
Autumn's eyes widened with shock as reality set in. Fear crept inside her as she cried for help. "Please, don't let them do this. Somebody help me, please." Autumn yelled and pleaded as tears streamed down her face. She searched for sympathy in the eyes of just one of her fellow pack members, but each turned away. Autumn kicked and struggled against the arms that pulled her out of the meeting hall. When they reached the outside, she was released, the force causing her to fall to the ground. "Please do not run. I have no interest in chasing you down." Thomas spoke coldly as he towered over her. "Get in the car." "No!" Autumn spat at the ground near his feet. "I am not a piece of property to be sold. I will not go with you." "You would let your pack suffer and die in an avoidable war because you selfishly refused to get in the car?" Thomas asked with a sideways glance. "They sold me to pay for a foolish choice they made. They are no pack to me," she growled. Thomas looked at her in surprise.
"Well, little Omega, the deal has already been struck. Now, are you going to get in the car, or will I have to tie you to the roof?"
Autumn scowled at him before standing tall and stepping into the car. She faced the window and stared out at the pack grounds, the place she had called home for as long as she could remember. Autumn had always imagined leaving this place, freeing herself from the debt she was working off, and finally making a home elsewhere. She never envisioned she would have to leave because she had been sold to pay their debt, or that she would once again be owned by someone else.
"You will enjoy working in the palace," Thomas said as they drove away. "It's far nicer than this place." "It's doubtful," Autumn mumbled. Thomas chuckled. "You're quite outspoken for a servant." She ignored him and looked out the window again, hoping to find some way out of this predicament. From one prison to another, her. A few hours later, the car veered off the highway and onto an old, paved 2-lane road. It snaked through the dense trees, the moonlight unable to penetrate their canopy. The only source of light came from the headlights of the town car they were in.
Autumn gazed out into the night, her heart heavy with the thought of the new life she was being forced into.
"We're here," Thomas murmured.
Autumn's eyes widened in shock as she looked ahead. Illuminated by lights in the darkness stood a massive palace. Its exterior was white with stone accents on the columns and various parts of the house. It had to be at least 3 stories, maybe even 4. Ornate masonry designs framed the incredible number of windows, and Autumn couldn't help but think about how much she would hate to be the person responsible for cleaning them all. Immaculately trimmed hedges and flowering bushes lined the base of the building, while a large garden boasted a maze of flowers and bushes in front, complete with a sizable fountain at its center. Autumn watched in awe as they drove past the front of the house, having never seen anything like it before. The car pulled up to the side of the palace, stopping at a small alcove.
"This is the servants' entrance,"
Thomas explained as he opened the car door.
"You will only ever enter or leave the palace from here. Never use the front door."
Autumn scowled in response as she followed him out of the car and into a dark hallway. It was late, almost 10 o'clock, and most of the servants were already in their rooms for the night, except for the head maid. Thomas gestured toward Autumn.
"This is Autumn. She's a new maid. The payment for High Mountain's treason."
He turned to her and offered a small smile.
"Welcome to the palace."
With that, he walked away, leaving her alone with the woman. "I am Mrs. Timmins, the head maid," the woman said, her eyes scrutinizing Autumn from head to toe. "Follow me," she huffed, turning around and walking down the hall. They climbed 3 flights of stairs to the top floor. "This floor is the servants' quarters. Everyone who works in the palace, aside from the cooks, lives up here. You will bunk with Marie, she's about your age. Curfew is at 10 unless you are instructed otherwise for work. I will not have you wandering around the palace at all hours." They stopped in the middle of the hallway, and Mrs. Timmins turned to face Autumn. "This is your room. Since you were sold and obviously don't have any clothing with you, I will see about having your things sent from your old pack. Tonight, you may borrow clothes from Marie, and your uniform will be given to you tomorrow morning. We begin work at 6, and being late is not an option. Good night." Autumn offered a small smile. "Thank you. Good night." For a moment, Mrs. Timmins's hardened expression softened. "You'll find that several of the servants in the palace are here because of a situation similar to yours. I'm sorry you had to leave your home. Let's make the best of it." Autumn smiled, grateful for the kindness, before knocking on the door and entering. "Hello?" "I'm concentrating. What?" A girl, who she assumed was Marie, snapped. "I'm Autumn. Mrs. Timmins said, I'm your new roommate." The girl's face transformed into one of surprise. "I'm sorry." She leaned over and offered a hand to shake. "I'm Marie. Nice to meet you." "Nice to meet you too," Autumn replied. Marie gestured to the bed across the room. "That bed is yours. Give me a minute and I'll give you the lowdown on the palace." Autumn smiled and sat on the bed, watching as Marie carefully glued what appeared to be a small box back together. Once she was finished, she placed the box gingerly on the table beside her bed. "So, are you here by choice?" Marie asked, sitting down beside Autumn. "No," Autumn frowned. "You? I'm sorry to hear that," Marie said, her face filled with sympathy. "For me, it's a little of both." Curiosity piqued, Autumn looked at her, and Marie continued. "My family was killed in a raid a few years ago. I didn't have anywhere else to go, so I got a job here." "I see," Autumn replied. "I understand. My family is gone as well." Marie smiled. "Well, let's get you something to sleep in, and tomorrow I'll see if I can have you work with me to get the lay of the land." "Sounds good, thank you," Autumn whispered. That night, she silently cried herself to sleep, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at the pack for what they had done, sadness that she would be here for the rest of her life, and disappointment that she would probably never find a mate or a new home as planned. Marie's alarm went off at 5:30. Autumn stretched and wiped the sleep from her eyes before sitting up with a yawn. "You get used to it," Marie said as she stood from her bed to get dressed. She pulled on her uniform just as Mrs. Timmons knocked on the door. "Here is your uniform, Autumn. Change and meet me downstairs in the servants' hall where you came in last night." "Yes, ma'am," she replied before shutting the door. Autumn changed into her uniform and walked downstairs with Marie. "Mrs. Timmons," Marie spoke as they approached her. "I was wondering if I could be the one to show her around today. Make sure she knows what to do and where she's going." Mrs. Timmons nodded. "That's fine." She turned to Autumn. "Tomorrow I will give you your list of chores and duties." "Yes, ma'am," she replied before following Marie down the hall and through a door to the main palace. Autumn looked around in awe as they entered. "This place is amazing," she murmured. Marie shrugged. "It's pretty nice. The magic wears off after you have to clean it every day." Autumn nodded. "Makes sense." They strolled across the marble floors, their shoes clicking as they crossed to the study. "So, what do you do?" Autumn asked as they walked into the room. "I'm in charge of cleaning the study and the library, and I'm the handmaid to the princess." "The princess?" Autumn asked curiously. "The king's younger sister, Lydia. She's the sweetest thing. That box you saw me fixing last night was hers. She dropped it, and I thought I would try to repair it." "That's nice of you," Autumn said as they began straightening up the study and spot cleaning around the room. Next, they moved to the library. They dusted the vast shelves of books and put away the ones that had been used. "This is nice," Marie said as they finished. "My chores went by much faster, having help." Autumn chuckled. "Glad to help. I wonder what my assignments will be." Marie shrugged. "Not sure. She might assign you to my rotation until you get used to things. Or maybe you'll do the bedrooms?" Autumn nodded. "Maybe." They walked back through the house, and Marie showed her different rooms and where to go before the bell for the princess rang, and she had to go upstairs to get Lydia ready. Autumn followed, and Marie walked her through the second floor. It was all the living quarters for the king and his family, along with an apartment for the beta. They entered the princess's room, and they both bowed their heads. "Good morning, Miss Lydia," Marie said quietly. "Good morning," she sang sweetly. Autumn looked at her. They seemed to be about the same age. Lydia looked at Autumn curiously. "Who is this?" "This is our new maid, Autumn," Marie replied, nudging her forward. "Hello, Princess Lydia," Autumn said with a smile. "You must be the girl from High Mountain I heard about," she said, smiling back. "Such a nasty business. I'm so sorry for your situation." Autumn lowered her head. "Thank you." Marie clapped her hands together. "All right, let's get you ready. Do you know how you'd like to wear your hair today?" Lydia shook her head. "I don't care. Surprise me." Marie got Lydia ready for the day, and they made their way back downstairs for breakfast. "How was your first morning, Autumn?" Miss Timmons asked as they sat down at the table for breakfast. "It was interesting. This is such a big place. I'm not sure I'll ever know where I'm going," Autumn replied. She gave a tight smile before they all began eating. At the end of breakfast, Marie introduced her to the 3 other maids before they all went out to clean up the royal family's breakfast. Autumn strolled through the palace, wondering if she would even have the time to think about trying to escape this place. It might take some time, but someday she would leave here. Exhausted, Autumn fell onto her bed with a heavy sigh at the end of the day. "You'll get used to the work," Marie assured her, taking off her uniform and hanging it in the closet. "It's not the work that's killing me, it's all the walking between the work," Autumn exclaimed. "No wonder you look so good. You get a full workout every day. So many stairs." Marie laughed as she pulled on her t-shirt. "It's a massive place, isn't it?" "It really is," Autumn agreed, closing her eyes. "I was surprised when Lydia knew who you were this morning," Marie said softly, her curiosity evident. Autumn exhaled before sitting up. "High Mountain Pack broke a treaty that the Alpha King made himself. The punishment was either war or a hefty fine. When they couldn't pay, they sold me as their punishment. Autumn lowered her head, the anger still fresh. Marie stared in disbelief. Your pack did that? That's horrible, she shrugged. Someday I'll leave here. It might take years, but I won't be a servant for the rest of my life. Marie smirked. Good luck with that, girl. Autumn drifted off to sleep, hoping that whatever her duties were tomorrow, they would give her the opening she needed to get away from this place. 5:30 came way too early, and Autumn groaned as the alarm went off. She and Marie dressed and made their way downstairs. Marie headed off to do her own chores, and Autumn continued on to find Mrs. Timmins. Good morning, she greeted as she entered Mrs. Timmons's office.
Good morning, Autumn. Are you ready for your assignments?
Mrs. Timmons replied, waving her in. She sat in the chair across from the desk. Yes, ma'am. Good, good, Mrs. Timmons said as she looked at the papers on her desk. Your daily assignment will be the upkeep of the king's apartment and the upstairs hallway and extra rooms.
That means the dining room and the spare guest bedrooms on the floor. Your duties in the Alpha's apartment include cleaning the kitchen and living area, the bathrooms, the office, and all 4 bedrooms.
And, of course, helping clean up meals along with the other maids. Is that acceptable? Autumn nodded. Yes. Good. Follow me and I will show you how to get there, Mrs. Timmons said as she stood and made her way out of the office. Autumn followed as they ascended a small staircase to the 2nd floor. They walked through the door and down the hallway to a large set of double doors.
This is your stop, Mrs. Timmons said as they entered. All the needed supplies are in the maid's closet here beside the kitchen. You will not enter the apartment until 10, and you have until 4 to get the apartment cleaned every day. The king rarely comes in here during the day, but if you see him, do not speak to him unless he speaks to you first. You will bow and show respect, and you will behave.
Yes, ma'am, Autumn said quietly, fearing the possibility of meeting the man whose fault it was that she was here. Also, I inquired about your things. They will be sent by the end of the day. She smiled brightly. Thank you, Mrs. Timmons. I appreciate that. Mrs. Timmons grinned before leaving Autumn to her work. Autumn took a deep breath before grabbing what she needed from the closet and beginning her chores. She proceeded down the hallway of the upstairs floor, cleaning, sweeping, and dusting. She freshened up the guest rooms and wiped down the dining room, preparing it for breakfast before heading back to the Alpha's apartment. Autumn began cleaning, starting in the bedrooms. The spare rooms were empty and unused. She freshened the beds, dusted all the surfaces, vacuumed, and wiped down the bathrooms. She slowly made her way into the king's room and exhaled with relief when he wasn't there. Even though Mrs. Timmons said he wouldn't be there, Autumn was still worried he might have been. She walked into the room and immediately smelled him. It was strong and overwhelmed her senses. She shook her head and, with a shrug, looked around to find it a bit of a mess. Autumn let out a huff before beginning her work again. She picked up the clothes and shoes off the floor and made the bed. She dusted, vacuumed, and cleaned the floors and the bathroom before making her way to the living area and kitchen and doing the same. Autumn glanced at her watch to find it was lunchtime and she was starving, so she put her things away in the closet and headed downstairs. How is it going? Mrs. Timmons asked as the staff sat down for lunch. It's going well. I only have a few more things to do. I'll finish after lunch, Autumn replied. Very good. Mrs. Timmons smiled before continuing her meal. Autumn finished her chores, glad it was an uneventful day. In the evening, Autumn lay on her bed and exhaled. So it's just the same thing every day? Marie smiled. Well, tomorrow is our day off, so we get to sleep as long as we want and get things done for ourselves. Want me to show you around the pack grounds tomorrow? Autumn smiled. That would be awesome. The next morning, Marie and Autumn both slept until almost 10. Autumn stretched, feeling well rested. They both showered, and Autumn went through the things that had arrived the night before. She grabbed some skinny jeans and a loose tee and got ready for the day, putting on a bit of makeup and attempting to tame her long, wavy hair. "Cutie!" Marie hollered as Autumn walked out of the bathroom. She laughed. "Thanks. Ready to go?" Marie nodded, and they made their way downstairs and out of the castle. "You'll see that our pack is actually not like most packs. It's large enough that we practically have our own town. Downtown is where we are heading," Marie said as they walked down the hill. The girls took a long path through the trees, and Autumn enjoyed looking at the beauty surrounding them. As the trees thinned, they exited to see the small town Marie had spoken about. There was the main street with rows of shops on either side. Surrounding the main street were small buildings housing other businesses, and past those were homes that Autumn assumed were for the pack. "This is awesome," she said as they stepped onto the sidewalk. "Right?" Marie said as she took Autumn's arm. "Let's wander." Autumn smiled, glad she had found a friend. They stopped for lunch at a small smoothie shop and continued window shopping, enjoying the first day off that Autumn had in 4 years.